Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My battle with lymphoma started about a year and a half ago. The doctors discovered it was stage 2 and it had spread throughout my neck and chest. They also found cancer in my thyroid, which resulted in losing half of it. The following 6 months were brutal, filled with intense chemotherapy and radiation treatments. I'm happy to say I've been in remission for a year now, but this story takes place during one of my rougher treatment periods. After an aggressive round of chemo, I have been stuck at home for what felt like ages. On one of my better days, I decided I needed to get out of the house. Being someone who's always kept everything spotlessly clean, my husband jokes that our house could pass a military inspection. It was driving me crazy that I hadn't been able to clean my car for weeks due to the treatments. Despite my husband and daughter's concerns about my health and COVID, I insisted on going out. I told them I needed some fresh air, and so did the car. After picking up a few things from the store, including a cozy new blanket, I headed to a car wash that offered interior cleaning services. Since I didn't have the energy to clean it myself, I decided to let the professionals handle it. While waiting, I noticed a woman staring at me. I probably didn't look my best. The chemo had taken its toll. My skin was pale and my hair, which I'd cut short before treatment, was thinning with noticeable bald spots. I'd refused to wear wigs or hats though. I wanted to face this head on. I was wearing a mask to protect my weakened immune system. Suddenly, this woman walked over to me and started screaming. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing out in public looking like that. I remained silent as she continued her tirade. She started asking what was wrong with me and if I was contagious, claiming I was putting everyone at risk. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was the one not wearing a mask while yelling about health risks. I continued to remain quiet, trying to avoid confrontation, but then she crossed a line. She grabbed me and shoved me hard in the chest, right where my cancer was. The pain was excruciating, like being hit with a sledgehammer on a severe burn. I tried to stand up and move away, but she grabbed me again and shoved me a second time. That's when my patience ran out. I swung my fist and connected with her face, knocking her out cold. I felt terrible about it. But honestly, what else could I do? The police and ambulance arrived shortly after. While the medics checked on Karen, who was just bruised but making a huge scene, I explained everything to the police officer. He reviewed the security camera footage and spoke with witnesses who confirmed my story. Karen was still causing a scene, screaming that I was a diseased woman who had attacked her. She tried telling the police that she had just asked if I was okay, and I had assaulted her unprovoked. The officer, whose mother was a cancer survivor, completely understood my situation. He asked if I needed a ride to the doctor's office to get checked out. I told him I had an appointment the next day, so I declined, but accepted a cold compress for my chest. Karen was charged with assault and battery, plus filing a false police report. The judge sentenced her to jail time, a $700 fine, and 300 hours of community service working with cancer patients at the hospital. The officer had suggested the community service, knowing firsthand what cancer patients endure. My husband and I later treated that kind officer to dinner as a thank you. He shared stories about his mother's cancer journey, and it was touching to connect with someone who truly understood what we were going through. I'm grateful for how things turned out, though I still wish I hadn't needed to resort to violence. I'm a 19-year-old woman now, but this happened when I was 18. My ex-best friend, who was also my roommate at the time, completely betrayed me. I had called the police to my apartment because of how she and her friends were acting, but when they arrived, she flipped the script entirely. She told them I had strangled her until she passed out and that I was on drugs. The reality? She was the one using drugs, but that's another story for another time. I ended up spending a week in county jail before they released me. The case was eventually dismissed in September since my ex-best friend never showed up to court or answered any questions. There was literally no evidence against me. For those who don't know how jail booking works, In my state, you have to wait 3 days between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. to find out your booking status. After that, you wait for a court hearing, but they usually don't tell you when it'll be. The worst part is weekends don't count. So if you get booked on a Friday, you're stuck waiting until Wednesday the next week. I got lucky and was booked on a Sunday night, with my court hearing set for Friday. During those 3 days of waiting to find out my status, I kept asking the guards about it. On Wednesday, which was the last day, our floor got to walk around freely for the day. We alternated with the first floor every other day. Even this tiny bit of freedom felt amazing after being in a cell. That day, we had this new guard who seemed ready to explode at anyone who breathed wrong. I tried my best to be super polite when asking about my status. Now, I should mention that I have what people consider a masculine name, and while I've been teased about it, I've always thought it was pretty strong. I went up to the guard platform, this massive thing that's like 5'5" tall, and had to stand on my tiptoes just to see over it. That's the rule, so you don't seem threatening to the guards. I politely asked her if she could check my booking status. She agreed and asked for my booking number. I pulled out the paper from my shirt pocket and read out my number, 1234567. That's when things got weird. She scoffed and told me to give her my actual number. I was confused because I had my inmate ID card with the same number on it. I double-checked just to be sure and told her again that it was 1234567. She flatly denied that it could be my number. When I asked what she meant, she claimed she was 99% sure that wasn't my number. By now, everyone in the area had gone quiet and was watching. The guard didn't even notice she was making a scene. I was already in a bad mental space, so I decided to stand my ground. I insisted that it was definitely my number. That's when she dropped the real reason for her attitude. She didn't believe my name was Dominic. All the other inmates who knew my name by then held their breath while I confirmed that yes, that was indeed my name. She still refused to believe me. Finally, I took out my ID and put it on the counter. She snatched it up with attitude, and everyone watched her face drop when she realized she was wrong. She quickly checked my number in the system and mumbled that my booking status was still pending. I took my ID back and walked away smiling while the other inmates tried not to laugh. Later, I filed a complaint with her superior. Turns out she got in serious trouble because when you're booked, they take your photo. So when she looked up my number, she should have seen my picture right away. She didn't even need to see my ID. The superior chewed her out right in front of everyone for being lazy and unprofessional. She got reassigned to a different section after that. Apparently, this wasn't her first time making assumptions about inmates, and her superior was sick of getting complaints about her behavior. I heard from one of the other guards later that she had to go through additional training about proper inmate identification procedures and professional conduct. For the rest of my time there, the other guards were extra careful to check their screens before making any assumptions. Some of the inmates even started calling me the name checker as a joke, saying I'd helped make the guards actually do their jobs properly. While I wouldn't say I'm glad I went through all this, at least something good came out of it. One less entitled guard making assumptions about people based on their names. A few years ago, my family hit rock bottom. We lost our home and were desperate for a place to stay. That's when my high school friend and her husband offered to let us live with them and their 2 young kids. They seemed like the perfect solution. We'd share rent for 1 bedroom and everyone would be happy. At least, that's what we thought. The first couple of weeks were great. My boyfriend and I both had jobs. He was a delivery driver and I worked as a waitress. We were saving money in a jar, hoping to get back on our feet soon. But then things started to get weird. My friend showed her true colors. She wouldn't get up until late afternoon, leaving her husband to deal with their kids who were both under 3 years old. She'd throw temper tantrums that would put her toddlers to shame. One day I heard something break in the kitchen and asked if everything was okay. Her husband just sighed and explained that she was having another bad day and had thrown milk at the wall again. When I asked if this happened often, his expression said it all. One day, we had $150 saved up in our jar. We went to the store, came back, and went to bed. The next morning, the money was gone. We knew she took it, so we decided to be petty and deducted that amount from our rent. When she asked about the missing portion of the rent, I casually mentioned we were short $150, pointing out how weird it was that money could just disappear like that. Her only response was a dismissive whatever, which told us everything we needed to know. An innocent person would have fought back harder. Then we both got jobs at the same warehouse. It was actually fun when she was in a good mood. She'd drive me to work, and I'd give her gas money. But one day, I got ready for work and heard her car drive off without me. When I got to work in my own car, she was acting like she owned the place. Her job was literally just putting stickers on boxes. That's when I noticed she was flirting with our boss. When I pointed it out to him, he seemed genuinely surprised and hadn't realized her intentions. The next thing we knew, she had called his supervisor with false harassment claims, nearly getting him fired. Then a co-worker pulled me aside to warn me that my friend had been spreading nasty rumors about me, calling me a horrible mother and a disgusting person who didn't take care of her kids. When we got home, I confronted her about everything. Her behavior at work and at home, how I'd been taking care of her kids more than she had, making dinner, cleaning, doing laundry, and giving them baths. I mentioned how her husband was dealing with health issues and she was only making everything worse. She responded by calling me a fake witch and a liar, demanding we leave as soon as possible. Luckily, we inherited some money when a family member passed away, so we got our own apartment. But the story doesn't end there. She cheated on her husband and left him for another man. Then she started spreading lies about her husband being abusive. Pretty ironic coming from someone who threw milk at walls. Her ex-husband eventually started dating my friend, and they're amazing together. My friend treats those kids like her own, buying them clothes, shoes, and everything they need. But their mom couldn't stand seeing them happy. She filed false police reports and got a protection order against my friend based on lies. Things got worse when the kids showed up with bruises. We reported her to Child Protective Services. Suddenly, she was posting on social media about how her new boyfriend was abusive to her and the kids. Then she deleted the posts and got back together with him. Now she needs supervision to see her kids, and her boyfriend isn't allowed near them. But she is still on social media, calling my friend a homewrecker and starting drama with other moms who've helped her in the past. What she doesn't know is that I've documented everything. Every fake police report, every false Child Protective Services case, every social media post where she contradicts herself. The evidence is piling up, showing a clear pattern of false reports and endangering her children. Yesterday, I turned everything over to the police. They're interested in the false report she filed, which is a criminal offense. The detective questioned her about the documented evidence of multiple false reports. She just kept screaming that everyone was against her and trying to steal her kids. When the detective mentioned they had her contradictory social media posts as evidence, she finally went quiet. After graduating from culinary school with honors, I found myself in a bit of a tight spot. The fine dining restaurant where I had planned to start my career suddenly closed down before I could even begin. With student loans looming and rent due, I took a job at this local breakfast spot, famous for their morning menu. It wasn't exactly where I had pictured myself, but the tips were good, and the regular customers were generally pleasant. The morning shifts were always busy, especially on weekends. But this one Tuesday morning was different. The restaurant was relatively quiet when this businessman in an expensive-looking suit walked in. He sat down in my section, barely looking up from his phone. I greeted him with the usual morning welcome and asked if he'd like to start with some coffee. He curtly responded that he wanted black coffee and immediately stated he was ready to order. He proceeded to order our classic pancake combo: 4 buttermilk pancakes, 2 eggs, hash browns, and when it came to choosing between bacon or sausage, that's when things got interesting. He chose bacon but then spent an eternity explaining how crispy he wanted it. I tried to acknowledge his request, but he kept interrupting me to emphasize that when he said crispy, he meant extra crispy. And when he said extra crispy, he wanted it practically burnt. He insisted it needed to be so crispy it would practically shatter. I wrote extra crispy bacon in capital letters on my notepad and headed to the kitchen. Our cook, a gruff but skilled veteran of the breakfast rush, nodded when I emphasized the bacon's requested crispiness. When I brought out his food and a coffee refill, I could tell from his expression that something was wrong. He picked up a piece of bacon, bent it slightly, and frowned. He complained that it wasn't crispy at all, emphasizing that he had specifically requested extra crispy bacon. I apologized and assured him I would have the kitchen make fresh bacon right away. I returned to the kitchen and told our cook to make it seriously crispy this time. The cook grumbled but complied. The second batch came out significantly crispier, but apparently it still wasn't enough. The customer examined the second batch and declared it was still too chewy, reminding me that he thought he had been clear about how crispy he wanted it. By the third attempt, even our usually patient cook was getting irritated. The bacon came out very crispy, but the customer still wasn't satisfied. He asked incredulously if we didn't understand what crispy meant. At this point, I'd refilled his coffee twice, and the rest of his breakfast was getting cold. I went back to the kitchen one last time and told the cook to just burn it slightly, as that seemed to be what he wanted. The cook, who had been cooking breakfast for longer than I'd been alive, gave me a knowing look and produced what was essentially burned bacon. When I set it down on the table, the customer's face turned red. He protested angrily, accusing us of mocking him and pointing out that he had asked for crispy, not burnt bacon. I refilled his coffee one final time and explained with a sweet smile that he had specifically requested bacon that was practically burnt. Those were his exact words. I told him I had made sure the kitchen followed his instructions precisely, and this bacon was exactly what he had described wanting, so crispy it would shatter. The customer stared at me, then at the bacon, then back at me. A few other diners were now watching the scene unfold. He started to speak but seemed to realize how ridiculous he would sound, complaining that his practically burned bacon was too burnt. He demanded to speak to the manager. I told him that our security cameras recorded audio so they would be able to replay his exact bacon specifications from when he first ordered. He sat there for a moment, his face getting redder. Finally, he threw $20 on the table and stormed out, leaving behind the burnt bacon he'd insisted on having 4 times over. After the customer left, the cook emerged from the kitchen and remarked that in his 30 years of cooking breakfast, he'd never encountered anyone that picky about bacon. I responded that at least he finally got exactly what he asked for. We had a good laugh about it, and the cook even treated me to breakfast after my shift. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.